Animation is a form of filmmaking that has almost no restraints when it comes to imagination, and no company understands that better than Studio Ghibli. For over 35 years now, Studio Ghibli have mastered the art of being able to immerse an audience within a film, and in my opinion, this is primarily down to the endless creativity put into each and every world they build. I was only properly introduced to Studio Ghibli within the last year or so it may be that I have a different perspective on these films to someone who's watched them during childhood. However, I think the way the ideas behind these films are presented is done in such a way that it becomes easy to make an instant connection with the characters and story, to the point where almost a sense of artificial nostalgia is created. I think what's more important when watching a Studio Ghibli film is your personality and what interests you individually. For me, that centres itself more visually, with elements such as locations and characters more likely to engage me than long sections of intimate dialogue, mostly down to the fact I have a very poor attention span. Therefore, the way Studio Ghibli, in particular Hayao Miyazaki, is able to present his ideas through visual metaphors and symbolism allows me as a viewer to fully invest myself within the expansive and imaginative worlds he creates. It could be argued that Miyazaki is what's known as an auteur figure, a term describing a director who's able to retain almost total creative control over each film they make. It's said that Miyazaki is present for each and every stage of his productions, from writing to animating to music composition, hence why so much of himself is projected through each one of his films. I think a lot of Miyazaki's success comes from his willingness to leave a story open and explore all elements of the world his characters find themselves in. This is most likely down to his methodology when it comes to idea generation. Miyazaki only starts his process with a rough idea of what he wants to portray and not a script, instead taking the time to storyboard out each scene as he goes and let the story come to him as he's working. As a result, he doesn't suffer from any of the creative restrictions that having a fully fledged script might present, and on the other hand we're left with what, in my opinion, is just unfiltered genius. For example, in Spirited Away it would have been a more conventional approach to keep the story within the bathhouse. However, instead Miyazaki chose to introduce us to a water train, resulting in one of the best sequences of the film that not only lets the film breathe but allows Miyazaki to introduce us to wider elements of the world. Furthermore, he clearly hasn't restricted himself when it comes to character design. We're given giant ducks, bouncing heads, Spider-Man, whatever that is, and of course the radish spirit. More to the point, Miyazaki is great at taking his own morals and themes and personifying them, with the most obvious example being No-Face. No-Face is used to represent the flaws with greed and materialism, as he uses gold in an attempt to become close with others. Hence he can only devour those who share his own materialistic personality. However, Miyazaki shows that relationships built on possessions and wealth are very temporary and easily broken, and it's only once No-Face has nothing that he's able to realise a proper friendship with Chihiro and become a professional textiles artist. Honestly, you just can't write this stuff. Only the point is, you can. In the documentary The Kingdom of Dreams and Madness, which focuses on the processes at Studio Ghibli and follows Miyazaki through the creation of what may potentially be his last film, there's a scene that I think summarises everything I like about the mentality behind these films.
草で絡まってる家なんて全然違うでしょ。もう草が絡まってるでしょ。もう屋根からね、ね、その右の屋根から隣の屋根に飛び移って駆け抜けて、その緑色の壁があるでしょ、緑と青っぽい、そのところに飛びついて、あの配管をよじ登ってですね、あの屋根の上を走ってさらに向こうのビルに行くっていうのをアニメーションでやったら面白いでしょ。それで電線の上歩けたら向こう側にも行けるはずなんですよ。もう上から見ると本当に全部むき出しにいろんなものが見えるんですよ。あのブロック塀の上を走り抜けることできるはずなんですよ。そうやっただけでね、つまんない街だと思ってるとかとんでもない映画の舞台になるんですよ。そうやって見ると結構面白いでしょ。面白いんですよ。向こうはるか向こうまで行けそうな気がするよね。いけんじゃないかな。
This tells me the reason Miyazaki is able to capitalise on his boundless imagination is because the realities he presents through film are genuinely realities that he'd like to experience himself. Animation is more than just a means of communication to him, it's also a way to realise and bring life to his own dreams and visions. It must have been incredibly important to be able to be that passionate about the things he was making, because his style of traditional animation takes ridiculous amounts of dedication. Every single frame of a Studio Ghibli film is an artwork in itself. They make even the grossest things look absolutely beautiful, even when they stray from their typical anime-like aesthetics such as in Red Turtle. Anyway, I suppose the real question is, what can I learn from Studio Ghibli and Miyazaki, particularly when it comes to world creation, audience immersion, and creative story writing? For those who probably haven't watched my previous videos about animation, I'm attempting to learn as much as I can about the genre, with the eventual goal of formulating my own idea and making my own movie. But for now, I just want to express what I think me and others looking to do similar can learn from these films, starting with colour. If you watch any Studio Ghibli film, you'll notice the colours they use completely match the tone and the feel of the story. For example, Kiki's delivery service is filled with bright reds, blues, and pinks, which emphasises the idea that the world's full of magic and wonder. It also helps us identify with the main character Kiki, as we're able to see her surroundings with the same childlike wonder that she is. On the contrary, a film like Graveyard of Fireflies, which has a much bleaker and more serious storyline, is less saturated and includes more monotone colouring, like grey and brown. However, brighter colours are used in moderation to create a juxtaposition when fantastical moments are happening. Perspective is another thing that Miyazaki in particular utilises when he wants to map out a setting. This could be by taking the characters into the air to show a bird's eye view, like in Kiki's Delivery Service, My Neighbor Totoro, or Castle in the Sky. It could be through a window, like in the train scene from Spirited Away. It could be from below, like in Howl's Moving Castle, to make something seem large or intimidating. The point is, Miyazaki wants the viewer to experience each world to its full capacity, so tries to show it to its entirety and isn't afraid to zoom in or out on certain elements of the world to achieve that. Another thing to learn, this time from Joe Hisaishi, the composer for the majority of Miyazaki's films, is that music should be used with an element of restraint so that it has impact wherever it is used. A noticeable difference between the works of Studio Ghibli and the traditional animations of Disney is that Disney films are over-flooded with constant background music. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, as a film's music can help establish the emotion of a scene, but having music for the sake of having music can have the opposite effect, where it becomes forgettable and unnoticeable, and doesn't have as much of an impression on the viewer. There's a reason that Hisaishi's music triggers such an emotional response for those watching a Ghibli film, and that's of course down to his incredible compositional ability, but also because it's used in the right places at the right times. Listen, I love film music as much as the next man, but there's nothing wrong with a bit of Foley every now and then, because it vastly improves the moments that are accompanied by score. I'll probably elaborate more on the effects of music and animation, so expect more of that in the future. In summary though, a well-written score used at the right times can greatly increase how immersed a viewer is in the film. Finally, I just want to focus again on how Miyazaki storyboards. I was pretty surprised when I found out he never starts with a fully fledged story, but the more I've thought about it, the more it kind of makes sense. I can't necessarily speak for him, but the way my brain works at least is that I'll have what I think is a good gist for an idea, and then I'll race off on loads of different tangents until I eventually have loads of mental ideas, with no distinct story arc or ending. With the way Miyazaki goes about this part of production, that wouldn't really matter because, as he lets his ideas flow naturally, these mental tangents turn into the intriguing creativity that lies throughout each of his films. I think there might be a cultural difference where in Western culture we're accustomed to a narrative all falling into place, where all the different ideas visited throughout the film formulate towards the end to make a tangible and clear story arc. The downside of this is it's then much harder to flesh out the everyday that occurs around the story, which is where Miyazaki's technique gets it right. Why is there a radish spirit there? Because in Miyazaki's head he's part of the bathhouse and that's all that really matters. He doesn't have to be part of the plot past the brief encounter Chihiro has with him. I don't know if Miyazaki's methodology is always correct though. Like in Howl's Moving Castle, it's clear there were so many ideas going on all at once that the ending's a little bit convoluted. On the other hand though, the rest of the film wouldn't have been nearly as good if it didn't jump about the place like it does. In summary, what's most important to take from the way Miyazaki constructs a world is to remove as many creative restraints as possible and just go a bit mental. Just go with what comes to mind at the time, because it's often the outlandish ideas that seem ridiculous at the time that end up being the most inspired. Anyway, those are just my thoughts on Studio Ghibli. I'm almost certain they'll come up again. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I was able to express my thoughts without being too confusing. If you have any different thoughts to share about your experience with Studio Ghibli films, be sure to share them in the comments. I realise people say that a lot, but I'm actually pretty interested in what other people think about them. Subscribe please, or my good friend the Radish Spirit will give you a stern talking to. Okay, goodbye everyone. Bye now.